Good evening and welcome to The Report with me, John Rees. The Islamic State group are reported to have bombed the cities of Homs and Damascus, killing at least 140 people. Tonight we'll be looking at the latest news from Syria. We'll also be looking at the presidential elections in Nigeria, and we'll also be looking at British Prime Minister David Cameron's launch of the referendum on British membership of the European Union. After returning from Brussels with a renegotiated package on Sunday, the Prime Minister briefed his cabinet. 5 ministers immediately publicly announced they would be campaigning to leave. In a further blow, the Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, announced that he would be supporting withdrawal as well. Nathaniel Amos-Sansom has this report.
41 years after the last national vote on Britain's relationship with Europe, it was announced this weekend that voters will be able to go to the polls on June the 23rd to vote on whether to remain or to leave the European Union. But as events over the weekend have shown, the vote has the potential to upend British politics and to divide the country down the middle. Arriving back in Downing Street on Saturday, after securing the deal with Europe, the Prime Minister David Cameron met with his cabinet to brief them on the result. Emerging after the meeting, the Prime Minister said in a statement that he would recommend voting to remain in the European Union.
Our plan for Europe gives us the best of both worlds. It underlines our special status, through which families across Britain get all the benefits of being in the European Union, including more jobs, lower prices, and greater security. But our special status also means we're out of those parts of Europe that do not work for us. So we will never join the euro, we will never be part of Eurozone bailouts, never be part of the passport-free, no-borders area, or a European army, or an EU superstate.
But as expected, many members of his ruling Conservative Party and even his own cabinet disagreed. Within hours, 6 cabinet ministers, including the Justice Secretary Michael Gove, a key ally of the Prime Minister, announced their intention to leave the EU by visiting the headquarters of the organisation Vote Leave. While all 6 of them publicly stressed that they still supported the Prime Minister, they said that they could not support his renegotiation.
Well, I very much welcome the concessions the Prime Minister was able to secure. He obviously worked incredibly hard, and these changes are welcome, but I think that we need more fundamental change. I'm afraid, having been concerned about the issue of Europe for many years, I think the only way we can get the relationship with Europe that works for the United Kingdom is by leaving and negotiating a fresh deal based on trade and friendly cooperation, not on political union.
With many members of his own party looking set to vote against EU membership, June's vote may hinge on the votes of supporters for other political parties. Whilst the leaders of the other major UK parties all stressed their support for the UK to remain in the European Union, many said that their priorities would be different from those of the Prime Minister.
Because this is a deal that's been reached because of the war in the Tory party. It's a war between those who have essentially a fairly xenophobic view of the country and the rest of the world, and David Cameron, who essentially wants a free market Europe and very little else. I think he could and should have done much more to protect our steel industry, done much more about social justice and social integration across Europe. He didn't do any of that.
Let's get on with it. I'll be making a positive case. The EU is about independent countries coming together to protect jobs, employment rights, human rights, social rights, and also to try to deal with some of the big issues like the refugee crisis, climate change, energy security that countries themselves can't deal with. Nobody says the EU is perfect, it's far from it, but I think our interests are better served by being in, and that's the argument I'll be making.
There was also intense speculation over the weekend as to whether the outgoing London Mayor Boris Johnson would support staying in or leaving the European Union. After what he called an agonising decision, the London Mayor said that he supported withdrawal from the European Union under the current proposals.
I've decided, after a huge amount of heartache, because I did not want to do anything, the last thing I wanted was to go against David Cameron or the government. But after a great deal of heartache, I don't think there's anything else I can do. I will be advocating Vote Leave, or whatever the team is called. I understand there are many of them. I think that is basically because I want a better deal for the people of this country. To save them money and to take back control. That's really, I think, what this is all about.
As Britain gears up for one of the most fundamental votes in recent history, the impending campaign is likely to divide parties and create unexpected coalitions, both in favour and against the EU. But as things stand, 4 months from polling day, it remains to be seen whether either side can win over public opinion. Nathaniel Sansam, The Report.
OK, now before we move to our discussion, let's have a look at what you've been saying on Twitter about these matters. Now, Molly Scott-Cato, Natalie Bennett's fellow MEP, says she's amazed at the media turning the EU referendum into an Eton debating spat. Shazza tweeted instead, "I'm outraged that 16 or 17-year-olds can't vote in the upcoming EU referendum. It's going to affect our generation greatly." Lastly, Jill tweeted, "Middle-class problems, people complaining about the EU referendum clashing with Glastonbury." Well, joining me to discuss all that, although probably not Glastonbury, is Diego Zuluaga, who's from the Institute of Economic Affairs, Saqib Bhatti from the eurosceptic group Muslims for Britain, and the leader of the Green Party, Natalie Bennett, who joins me in the studio. Natalie, welcome to the programme.
Great to be back with you.
You're welcome. Now, before we get on to the substantive questions about the EU, what about the package that Cameron came back with? Was that tinkering? Was it substantive, meaningful?
It was, the whole thing was a sideshow. And I think one of the key things to point about is that many of the things that David Cameron won, the restrictions on in-work benefits, freedom for the City of London from controls that could help control our out-of-control, fraud-ridden, corrupt financial sector, those things we disagree with, but they're actually all dependent on decisions of the British government. So if we can change the British government, then we can get rid of most of the substantial parts of what David Cameron negotiated. We don't agree with them, but that's really not the question that's coming up in the referendum. The question is, do we want to stick together, work together, and tackle the problems that we jointly face? Or do we want to split off into an uncertain future? We're a family. I've been talking to lots of people who've got relatives who live in various parts of continental Europe, some people whose children will have different nationalities across Europe. We're thinking, I want us to be part of the EU. That's my family. That's where my family live. This is our people.
Diego Zuluaga, let me bring you into the conversation. Welcome to the programme. The deal that Cameron brought back, Natalie Bennett says it's tinkering. Is it?
Well, I don't think it was very meaningful either way, to be honest. I think some of the changes that were secured have a relatively little impact on the economic consequences of EU membership for Britain. I mean, the issue of in-work benefits is a paradigmatic one in the sense that migrants don't come to Britain from the rest of the European Union for the in-work benefits. They come here to work, and they are, as a result, productive members of British society. They are taxpayers, and they contribute more in tax than they take out in services. So it's beneficial for both sides. With the other safeguards, they are largely symbolic. The exemption from ever closer union, the Eurozone safeguards, they will probably be incorporated into the treaty, but I don't think they will have much of an economic impact over the current setup.
OK, Saqib Bhatti, your view on the Cameron renegotiation wouldn't have changed your mind one way or the other about staying in or staying out, would it?
I mean, the truth of the matter is, both the guest speakers have also said it, there was not much meaning to these negotiations. I believe the Prime Minister went there with the best of intentions, but I think the good symbol of the influence that we currently hold in the European Union, we're the second largest economy in Europe, one of the fifth largest economies in the world, and we've turned around and said, look, we're thinking of leaving, and it's a serious concern, and this is what we've got in return. I think generally, the British people have not, I think Natalie said it was a sideshow. I'd probably agree with her on that, actually. I think there was not much to it, and people are now starting to ask the question about what value does the European Union really bring to them.
OK, so the renegotiation was a bit of a farce, probably constructed, as Jeremy Corbyn was saying, to deal with tensions inside the Tory party. But are we in danger of the whole referendum campaign being a kind of Conservative Party leadership contest and less of a referendum on Europe? We've had 24 hours of news now which has been all about this subject. Must be frustrating for you, for Labour, for the left Leave people, none of whom have had a voice in this.
I think it is frustrating, although it's important to stress that, those of us who are engaged in the political world, are focusing on all of this word by word. I doubt most of the members of the public have really turned their attention yet to thinking about the EU referendum. So I think we've got a long way to go, and it's really important that we actually get to debate the issues, debate the fundamental principles, not be debating personalities, not be debating, as you say, who's going to be the next leader of the Tory party. Let's really debate about whether it's better if we stick together and work together, joint problems. You think about environmental issues like air pollution, water pollution, workers' rights, food standards. All of those things are things that we should decide. They apply right across Europe. We don't have boundaries. The air pollution doesn't get to a national boundary and stop. Same with the water pollution. Same with things like I heard people advocating a Leave campaign saying we have to defend our fish. I haven't actually seen any fish carrying passports. It's really, we need a proper...
David Cameron gets his way, they may have to.
Well, exactly. A proper, sensible, serious debate about the issues here. And, the first 24 hours aren't encouraging, but it is only the first 24 hours. Let's hope that we can really settle down. It's a very short campaign. You look at the Scottish referendum campaign, that was a 2-year campaign of lots of grassroots meetings, lots of local debates. There's not much time for that to happen. But actually, I know in Worcester, where I was visiting recently, there was a pub that during the election had 10 debates for the general election for their local seat. And they're planning to do something similar for the EU referendum campaign. And I think really hope that we see a real grassroots debate, discussion. People are able to get decent, sensible information and make their decision on that basis. And I'm confident when they get that information, they'll decide to remain in the EU.
Diego, even if it doesn't turn into a prolonged Tory party leadership campaign rather than a referendum on the EU, might it turn into a referendum on the Cameron government? I mean, if he loses, he's toast, and lots of people don't like the political establishment and may decide to vote on that basis.
That could well be the case, and indeed I think it is fair to say that there is a level of division between establishment and anti-establishment, if you will, views on the Remain versus Leave campaigns. I personally think that the performance of the government is going to have some impact, but I think it's going to be a debate largely on the merits of membership of the European Union, which is why this whole renegotiation was of relatively little import, because really what we're deciding about is whether we stay in the European Union or not. And I happen to believe that it would be better for us to stay, because it is more likely to result in the kinds of open economic policies and market-driven policies that bring prosperity to countries. And over the period that the UK has been a member of the European Union, it has become vastly better off. It has reformed its economy successfully to the point where it is now slated to become the strongest economy in Europe by 2030. That is not least a result of membership of the EU, in the sense that it's promoted trade, it's promoted the free movement of people, and so a lot of talented people have moved to this country and become productive members of society. And I think those benefits are likely to continue. And Britain is globally engaged, whether it is a member of the EU or not. But I think membership of the European Union just brings a number of added benefits that are important to take into consideration.
Saqib, just let me ask you this question. You're running a Eurosceptic Muslim campaign. Why should Muslims be in favour of leaving differently than anybody else?
Well, look, first of all, I mean, we're a grassroots, non-partisan, cross-party campaign, and what we're basically saying is this isn't really a question of faith, it's a question of identity. And of course, we're British Muslims, we're proud to be British, and we're proud to be a Muslim, and what we're saying is, actually, we believe that Britain outside of the European Union would be stronger. I think Diego made a point there about the economic growth of this country, but actually, if you look at the economic growth of other countries outside of the European Union who've had the ability to make free trade deals, for example, and this is something you'll hear a lot of, because obviously we do not have control over our free trade deal policy making, or over our foreign direct investment, for example. There are significant markets out there where we would love to have free trade deals with them. And actually, what we're saying is, let's have the ability to make the policies that are good for the British people. And that's what we're saying. If you're a part of a club where you've got 28 member states, it's common sense that obviously British interests are not going to be at the top of the agenda for all the other member states. And we're not saying we want to isolate ourselves from the European Union. What we're saying is we'll be a good neighbour, we'll trade with them, but we want to be able to trade with the rest of the world. And that's what we're saying. We want people to stand up. Ethnic minorities historically have not engaged in this debate, and we're saying have your voice heard, and we're campaigning for the Out campaign.
Natalie, let's examine some of the you're in the Yes campaign, but the dominant voices in the Yes campaign are going to be the majority of the Tory party and the majority of the Tory cabinet. They're going to be, as we see today with the letter issued today, nearly every major corporation in this country, the CBI, the FT, the Economist. You're not comfortable with those people, are you?
Well, I'm comfortable with an argument that I'm comfortable with. And, the reality is I find myself often in a very similar situation when we're talking about immigration. We believe in a fair, humane, just immigration system. We believe in, removing restrictions to family reunions that the current system does. So I often find myself sitting with everyone, including the Adam Smith Institute, and they may be saying that immigration is good for big business and the economy. I'm saying immigration is good for people. People should be able to live with their own families. People should be able to, refugees should be able to find refuge in Britain. So I'm quite used to, in one argument, being with a whole lot of people I'm very uncomfortable with. And I think there's an interesting illustration there. I mean, you've just had the two speakers on the line who are on different sides of the camp of the in or out, but they're both praising the values of free trade and free trade deals. Now, I'm going to disagree with both of them. The Green Party has been right at the forefront of opposition to the proposed EU-US free trade deal that's known as TTIP. The Greens across Europe are leading in that. Now, indeed, our membership of the European Union has helped to ensure that we haven't signed a similar deal as the UK with the US. That's a great thing. Free trade deals like that are a huge threat to our sovereignty, to our democracy, to our sort of standards, to our NHS and the possibility of reversing privatisation of the NHS. So I believe in fair trade. Free trade, the direction of these deals is entirely wrong. So, you've got two speakers there, in and out, and I disagree with both of them.
Diego, I mean, as Natalie said, you've been praising the virtues of a sort of neoliberal Europe, but most political commentators say that if this referendum's going to be won for the people who want to stay in Europe, it's going to be won by the Labour Party, led by Jeremy Corbyn, who's going to put many of the same kind of arguments that we've been hearing from Natalie Bennett. So if the majority of people in Britain vote to stay in, they'll be voting to stay in for precisely the opposite reasons that you're suggesting that the EU is a good idea.
I don't think that will be the case, actually. I think it's mostly going to be about whether we are better off by being a member of the European Union or not. And I think the reality of it is that it is market policies of the kind fostered by the European Union that make us all better off. So I think you can make all sorts of ideological points about what you would like the world to look like, but there is no questioning the fact that the main reason that much of the world has become a lot richer in recent years is thanks to trade, to increased trade and a greater prevalence of free trade between countries. The US is the UK's biggest trading partner. Having a free trade agreement with them, within or without the European Union, would be immensely beneficial. And I think people are going to, those kinds of arguments are going to resonate with people because it touches their pockets. And they can clearly see it in the price of the certain goods and services that they buy, in their ability to travel cheaply around the world, and so forth. So I don't think it is not a matter of ideology and trying to make arguments from the left or the right. It really is a matter of trying to quantify what the benefits and costs of EU membership are. And I happen to believe that the benefits significantly outweigh the costs.
Saqib, is one of the arguments that you're likely to be making about immigration as well? I mean, a lot of the pro-EU people say, there's the open borders, there's free movement of labour, but it's really only free movement of people in Europe already. If you're not in Europe, you're facing Fortress Europe. You're facing being dumped in the Med. So is that an argument that you're going to put?
Well, probably not the way you just put it there, but what I would say is, look, I mean, there's a sphere to have a sensible, mature debate about immigration. Actually, I think it was something Natalie said where she was talking about the European family, etc. Well, actually, there's 4 million British Muslims in the United Kingdom. Many of them come from South Asian families, first, second, third generation, etc. What about their families? What about their immigration? And you just mentioned Fortress Europe. That's precisely the point we're making, actually, that there is a two-tier immigration system, and it discriminates for people outside of the European Union. And actually what you're talking about is a much bigger family if you consider the Commonwealth. I mean, if you consider Commonwealth countries, those people probably speak our languages. If you're from Australia, Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, they share the cultural heritage. The legal systems are fundamentally based on the same as English common law. The accounting systems are the same. There's actually a really strong argument to have a much fairer immigration policy, and that's what we're advocating. We're saying let's take control of our policy making around immigration, and let's have those immigration policies that are good for the British people. We want to put British interests at the centre of our policy making, which I feel we've lost while we've been part of the European Union.
I mean, Natalie, Saqib was referring to it. You said that the sort of European Union is a family that you want to be part of. But isn't the truth here really that it might be a family, but some of the people running the family are pretty nuts? I mean, they broke the Greek government. They've got Fortress Europe. I mean, it's like having a family where your uncle's completely mad and you can't do anything about changing his policy.
There's a great deal wrong with how the EU is being run. There's no doubt about that. It's power far too centralised on Brussels. The imposition of austerity on southern European states has been absolutely socially disastrous. It's economically entirely the wrong direction. But there's a really clear parallel here that we can draw with Westminster. There's a huge amount wrong with our Westminster Parliament. We have a government there imposing hideous austerity on Britain, opposing the very kind of family migration rules that Saqib was just talking about, in terms of you have to be earning more than £18,600 a year to bring a non-EU spouse or partner.
Because so-called Commonwealth immigration has collapsed under the...
Well, but that's the choices of the British government that's done that, and that's a British government elected to Westminster with the support of only 24% of eligible voters. We've got an entirely broken system of semi-democracy in Westminster, without even mentioning the unelected House of Lords. But the answer is not to give up on democracy. The answer isn't to abandon Westminster. The answer is to stay in, fight for reform. I'm fighting a great deal for electoral reform, for replacing first past the post with proportional representation, a fair vote where people know their vote counts. And the only way you can do that is by staying in and fighting. And the same thing with Brussels. If we just walk away, then we're creating a whole new set of problems. We're leaving the problems that are there in Brussels. And it is really worth saying that, Brussels would still have a huge say over many things in terms of rules for manufacturers, in terms of the kind of standards that countries like Norway have to live up to, even though they're not members of the EU. But then we wouldn't be in there having our say.
Isn't the problem for that argument this? Everybody understands how you change a British government, how you pressurise a British government, how you mobilise and demonstrate against a British government. Nobody can see this with the EU. There are no, or virtually no, demonstrations in Brussels because A, nobody thinks they can get there, and B, nobody thinks it's worthwhile anyway because it hasn't got the power to change things.
Well, I think the question is of, we've seen huge protests. You and I were both at a meeting of the junior doctors and protesting against the imposition of tuition fees on student nurses, the abolishment of the bursary. We're all here fighting, but until we change the system, we're not getting a change of mind from the government. So we need to be in to fight, to change, to deliver a social Europe, a people's Europe, one that works for the common good of Europe, all of its citizens, whatever their origins.
Natalie Bennett from the Green Party, thanks very much for joining us, and my thanks also to Saqib Bhatti and to Diego Zuluaga. But I'm afraid that's all we've got time for in this part of the programme. Do rejoin us for the second part of the show, where we'll be having a roundup of today's main news headlines. See you in a moment.